Liz has worked for the U.S. Department of Labor for 22 years, starting at the headquarters of the Mine Safety and Health Administration in Arlington, Virginia. Liz was an OSHA compliance officer in South Georgia for 14 years and then worked for 6 years as an assistant area director in the Savannah area OSHA office. Liz has a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Studies from Savannah State University and a Master of Public Health concentrating in Industrial Hygiene from the University of South Carolina School of Public Health. Liz?
Well, thank you for that introduction. Hello, I am very pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you today about worker safety and health in blueberry farming on behalf of my agency, OSHA. I am very disappointed that I won't have an opportunity to meet some of you in person this year, but I'm hopeful that during future conferences, I will have that opportunity. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns and would like to reach out to me, you can reach me through my OSHA, Federal OSHA Raleigh area office. Why do I believe that OSHA is important? Worker safety is important, and it's a passion of mine. It's because every day in America, 12 people go to work and never come home as a result of a workplace incident. And still, every year, nearly 4 million Americans suffer a serious workplace injury. The agency I work for, OSHA, came about in 1971 as a result of Congress passing the OSHA Act. President Nixon signed it, and our agency came into being with the primary purpose to assure safe and healthful working conditions for men and women in this country. Our agency is primarily an enforcement agency. We have specific worker protection rules, regulations and standards that employers must comply with. And we enforce our regulations by conducting on-site inspection activity with compliance officers. And if violations are found at the job site, we typically issue what's known as a citation for those violations, and penalties are typically assessed along with a citation. Our agency mission is to save lives, to prevent injuries, to protect the health of America's workers. Everybody has a right to a safe and healthful workplace free from recognized hazards. Listen, safety and health is very important in the agricultural industry as well as general industry and construction. And this is illustrated by a number of inspections that I have been involved with over the past 3 years in South Georgia. You know, our office in Savannah has investigated 3 heat stroke fatalities in the past 3 years involving workers who are harvesting in the fields. We have also inspected a job site where there was an amputation that occurred while packing vegetables in a pack house. We investigated a serious spinal injury where a field worker fell from a trailer while harvesting squash and was actually then run over by the trailer. And also a fractured leg that resulted after a worker was struck by a trailer. So this is a very familiar field worker harvesting photo. And the reason I wanted to show it to you, because there are actually a number of important occupational hazards that we're looking at and might not even recognize immediately. First and foremost, there is the sun that generates heat. Not only does it create the heat stress hazard, but the sun damages the skin as well. It is known to cause skin cancer. There's a lot of exertion that occurs during harvesting awkward postures, lifting, ergonomic type hazards, and as well, the exertion can contribute to heat stress. We have chemical hazards in the field where there may be pesticide residue on the crops that are being harvested. And there's also struck by hazards when there's any vehicles in the vicinity, and always slip, trip, and fall hazards. So I'm just providing bullets of the primary hazards that exist in farming operations. I mentioned the chemicals and the pesticides. Sometimes chemicals and pesticides are in the form of toxic gases. The sun, heat we've talked about. There's a lot of machinery and equipment in farming activities, not only the tractors and the transport vehicles, but the processing equipment, the packing equipment, and so forth. Ponds are usually found on farms as well, and our Savannah office has conducted a number of fatalities that were a result of drowning. Most of those drowning fatalities occurred when equipment either was inadvertently driven into the ponds or tipped over into the ponds. There are always hand tools and electrical hazards in the farming industry, maybe not so much out in the field, but certainly in the maintenance shop areas that exist in farming activities. We've already talked about slips, trips, and falls and lifting type hazards. Not necessarily pertinent to blueberry farming, but I wanted to mention grain handling and grain bin hazards because they are so prevalent in farming activities. And finally, I wanted to talk about noise as being a hazard in farming operations, because there are times when workers are around loud equipment for a significant amount of time during the day performing their work, and that can lead to permanent hearing loss. Our agency provides a significant number of resources to help employers. I wanted to make you aware of that. We have a very robust website, OSHA.gov. And in that website, you can link to publications on a wide variety of hazards. And some of the publications are specific to heat stress. I wanted to point a couple of those out to you. We do have a 50-page training guide named Water, Rest, and Shade that can be used by employers to train workers. And that publication is available in both English and Spanish, as are many of our publications. So we offer everything from a training manual that can be used to a very basic informational card that you see on the right-hand side, which just highlights the particular hazards and can be used to discuss with employees during pre-job meetings and reminders and so forth. I just briefly wanted to go through a few slides to show some of the hazards that are very common when we talk about electrical hazards. Here's a hand tool with a seriously damaged cord. We often see electrical hazards when electrical systems are modified. This is a conveyor system where a toggle switch was added to a receptacle box and it was never reassembled. So of course there are live electrical parts there that can create a hazard. Here's another electrical hazard that we see where there are blanks missing in electrical equipment. This is a breaker panel box. Of course, behind that panel is a live electrical bus bar. And there's typically switch boxes and so forth at work sites, including farming operations. And oftentimes we find the knockouts missing in these boxes, which of course result in an electrical hazard. For conveyor systems, which there are quite a few in agricultural industry, we see a lot of unguarded power transmission. For instance, here's a chain and sprocket that is unguarded, and also you will see belts and pulleys that are not fully guarded. And another hazard I wanted to point out in this particular photo is that there is an end shaft, a rotating shaft that is much longer than it should be. Every year, we conduct investigations into amputations and fatalities that result when clothing gets caught up in these shaft ends. So they should be shortened as much as possible. This is a picture of a standard box fan that is probably not designed for commercial use and really shouldn't be in an industrial or agricultural setting. The guard got beat up on this one apparently and is entirely missing, and it's pretty obvious that if an employee inadvertently got a hand caught in there, it would be a serious injury. And finally, I wanted to show you this fall hazard that we often see in farming operations. Individuals having to get up on top of vehicles to perform their work. Now, when you're out in the field and have to get up on a vehicle, it's not always feasible to provide fall protection. So we have allowances for that, and you can get up in vehicles in the field without fall protection if it's not possible. But here I wanted to point out that it is entirely possible because there's an overhead structure where you can install anchor points for a fall arrest system. So anytime an employee is working above 4 feet and fall protection is feasible, it should be provided. So almost all employers are covered by OSHA standards, and we enforce our rules, but there are a few exceptions that were actually written into the OSHA Act itself. And I wanted to point one of those out to you specifically, is that farmers who only use family members are actually not covered by the OSHA Act. And the other exemption I wanted to point out to you is that businesses that are covered by other federal agencies are not then covered by OSHA. For instance, if you have a truck driver that is, hauling over the road, that would actually fall under Department of Transportation, DOT regulations. Besides exceptions and exemptions written into the OSHA Act itself, every year Congress funds our agency, and through the Appropriations Act, they place exemptions and limitations on our agency for enforcement activity. And again, I'm mentioning this to you because one of the exemptions is for farms that in the past 12 months have had fewer than 10 or fewer employees and no temporary labor camps. As you can see from this table, which is taken directly out of one of our directives, we are not permitted to conduct any type of inspection on an employer that meets that criteria. So just to let you know what our inspection priorities are, first and foremost are to inspect reported imminent dangers and try to eliminate those immediately. Our priorities following are fatality and catastrophe inspections, complaint and referral inspections, programmed inspections, and for all of our inspections, we do conduct a certain percentage of follow-up inspections to make sure employers have corrected the hazards as they were supposed to. Before I talk about any safety and health standards, I do just want to mention that OSHA does have record keeping and reporting rules that do apply to agriculture. We have a record keeping rule that requires employers to record and report work-related fatalities, injuries, and illnesses. And if you're not familiar with that rule, there are a number of resources available to you. We have publications, extensive a resource page designated to record keeping, so you can learn more about it, or you can take specifically designed courses for OSHA record keeping. But to summarize, our reporting requirements are that all employers must report work-related fatalities within 8 hours, and within 24 hours report inpatient hospitalizations, amputations, and losses of eye. It's easy to report to us. We have a 800 hotline number. You can call your nearest OSHA office during normal business hours, or you can notify us through an online portal. Recently, our agency has started collecting some of the injury illness data online. It's required that employers submit electronically. And for agricultural operations, if your establishment has more than 20 employees working for it, you are required to submit your OSHA 300A form by the March 2nd deadline every year. So what standards do apply for farming, blueberry growing? I mentioned the record keeping already. There are actually very limited standards available that have been written specifically for agriculture. That would be for rollover protection for tractors and other equipment, guarding of equipment and machinery, and field sanitation regulations. And we also incorporate a few general industry standards that also apply to agriculture, such as regulations for temporary labor camps, accident prevention signs and tags. And we have a regulation called hazard communication, which is a standard that is written to provide requirements for employers to ensure that they have properly trained their employees on the hazardous chemicals that they may be exposed to at work. I did just want to mention briefly about field sanitation and temporary labor camps. Our agency, OSHA, does have a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour that actually enforces those two regulations for us. If we find a hazard on a farm and it is not covered by one of the few standards or regulations that we have written, we do rely on our 5A1 General Duty Clause citation. And that is a citation that can be issued for any recognized serious hazard in the workplace. We typically use that General Duty Clause in farming for hazards such as heat stress, unsafe electrical, drowning, falls, etc. So just to give you an idea of what types of violations are most commonly cited in fruit and vegetable farming activities, and as well post-harvest crop activities. I've given you a list of the top 10 violations that were cited by federal OSHA in fiscal year 19. Topping the list is the hazard communication standard that I spoke of earlier. Second most commonly cited standard is our General Duty Clause. And that's, again, because we have so few specific regulations that apply to agricultural operations. We also cite 1910-147 lockout tagout, which is a general industry standard specific to ensuring that equipment is made safe before servicing and maintenance. You may notice that that was not on the list of standards that's covered in agriculture. However, it is covered under post-harvest crop activities, because once the product leaves the field and it goes for further processing, such as cleaning, sorting, packing, and so forth, that's no longer considered agriculture, and all of our general industry standards apply at that point. Rounding out the top 5 is respiratory protection and process safety management violations. Process safety management is a standard that we have to protect employees from highly hazardous chemicals such as chlorine and ammonia. We've also cited failure to report fatalities and hospitalizations, the failure to guard machinery and equipment. We have a number of grain handling facility violations that are cited in agriculture, and finally, rounding out the top 10, we have cited emergency response operations and the general materials handling regulation more frequently than others. in fruit, vegetable farming, and post-harvest crop activities. When we do issue violations, again, there are typically penalties assessed. I'm not going to talk about the penalties a lot, just know that they are there. And I wanted you also to know that there is a penalty reduction that is based on the size of the company. I also wanted to let you know that our agency also covers whistleblower protections for employees that bring safety and health concerns to our agency's attention or to your company's attention. They are protected through whistleblower statutes. And our agency, oddly enough, also enforces more than 20 other whistleblower statutes. For instance, if an employee filed a complaint about any environmental concerns, commercial motor carrier concerns, consumer financial protections, or the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, if they were discriminated against, they would file a whistleblower complaint with our agency. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, besides enforcement of safety and health rules and ensuring whistleblower protections, our agency provides a lot of resources into providing consultative services, compliance assistance to employers. One of the programs that OSHA funds is what I say consultative services. Is available in most states. It is free to small employers. And in the state of Georgia, it's administered by a group of professionals at Georgia Tech. Consultative services will come out to your site and conduct an on-site inspection to identify serious hazards. They don't assess penalties. They don't notify OSHA about it. The only obligation is that you agree to correct any serious hazards found by consultants. So I do want you to take advantage of that opportunity if you are a small company, meaning less than 250 employees at a single site or 500 corporate-wide. So with that, I hope I've given you a high-level overview of our agency and how we work in the farming industry. And with that, I would ask if you have any questions. I'd be happy to try to answer them for you. Thank you very much.